Hello, I'm so happy to be here with Ideagen at the NASDAQ in New York. That's very exciting. And I understand that you also had a fantastic summit yesterday, G2I2 at the United Nations. I've just arrived from Frankfurt, Germany, and so I'm delighted to be able to speak with you about achieving the UN SDGs and prosperity with space, or my life in using satellites to provide universal access and then to use satellites to access the universe. So, the world has never needed so much connectivity, so much interactivity, and so much interconnectivity. And, I believe that what we are seeing now with space is truly a democratization of space and actually a womanization of space. So I'm very excited about this. So, my story traversing space from providing universal access and using space started in 1957 when I was 5 years old, when the Sputnik was launched. But I didn't get a Sputnik like the one I just showed you. I got a Sputnik that looks like this little flying saucer in the middle of that tree. And Santa Claus was inside. And so from then on, I was convinced that everything good came from space. And quite frankly, I think it still does. So, when people ask me, how do you get these ideas to use space and to make things happen? And it is never to think of using space. What happens is that I see a wrong and I say, this wrong needs to be corrected. And so in 1983, I saw a wrong in Europe that there was the German television, there was the French television, there was no possibility of looking at any of the Eastern European televisions. There was no possibility, even if you were in the UK, you couldn't look at a French television. If you were in Italy, you could not look at a German television. It was amazing. And so I said, my gosh, we need to give citizens freedom of choice in their television viewing. And so that is why I created Astra. And Astra, as you can see here, in 1983, we had the footprint that covered all of Europe, not half of Europe. The line wasn't drawn in our thinking. It was barrierless. And what is amazing is that when we launched our satellite, now this is a picture, I promise you, it does get better because you will see, unfortunately, I am the only woman in this picture. But this was the picture when we were launching the Astra satellite, Europe's first private satellite television system, and quite frankly, the world's first transporter satellite television system. We were in Kourou, and I was scared to death because I had told Luxembourg, the country of my husband, he's the very cute guy in the aloha shirt next to three over from me. I had told Luxembourg that they could have a satellite system because I grew up in satellites. I knew how to do satellites. And I thought that they would be the perfect place to have a satellite system. They also needed to have a new economic pillar. And so this was the night before the satellite was launched. And I was very, very afraid because, quite frankly, the future of Luxembourg and the future of Europe for freedom of choice was hanging on this satellite. Well, you know what? It was December 13th, 1988. And because we had always thought, and I had always thought, that there would be freedom of choice and that the wall would come down, 11 months later, November 9th, the wall did come down, and we were the only satellite system in the world to cover all of Europe. And we were a huge success. And, you know, in these days, it's so interesting because in 1995, we became so important and the wall had come down. And for the first time, there was COCOM. And the COCOM rules were allowing American technology to be also used in Russia. And so the Russians had the best satellites. And so we created the first transborder, transcontinental commercialization of a launcher. So, you know, Elon Musk, I'm sorry, I did it 10 years beforehand, and I did it in Russia, and I did it in the United States, because it was a joint venture between Lockheed Martin and Khrushchev. And you can see the logo of my satellite Astra on top there. We were the first commercial satellite to ever be launched by a Russian launcher. So, you know, it's one thing to become number one, it's another thing to stay number one. And so in 1998, I conceived and architected SES Astra Global. And the reason I did this is also kind of very interesting. In 1992, when the digital revolution came about, we were the subject of a hostile takeover from Rupert Murdoch, Leo Kirsch, and Silvio Berlusconi. These three people said, wow, Astra is covering all of Europe, and we want to take it over. And when we take it over, we will just have our satellite programs. We will not allow the new players to come. And in 1992 was the digital revolution, where there were going to be tons of new players. And so they made an offer to the board of SES Astra, my satellite company, and the board accepted it. They pre-signed the deal. And I said, oh my gosh. And I tried to tell them, you cannot do this. And they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't listen. They were too afraid of taking a risk of something new, the digital revolution. And so I knew I had to stop it, because my idea of freedom of choice was never going to be continuing if that happened. So I went to the press. I went to the Financial Times, and I told them that a cartel was trying to take over my satellite company. And if this happened, we would have closed skies and not open skies. I shared this story with you because what happened then was that Leo Kirsch was in the office of Chancellor Kohl when he was the Chancellor of Germany, and he called the President of Luxembourg. And Chancellor Kohl said to Mr. Santer, he said, who is this Candace Johnson? And Jack Santer, the President of Luxembourg, said, well, why? And he said, because she is not letting Leo Kirsch and his friends, Rupert Murdoch and Silvio Berlusconi, take over the SES Astra satellite. And Mr. Santer said, well, she has always fought for the independence of Luxembourg and of Astra, and we stand behind her. So, you know, talk about woman power, though. So, you know, and so I decided that the only way that I could make certain that there would never, ever be a takeover of my satellite system was to make it be that global satellite system and the world's largest satellite system. So, you know, space is wonderful. And this was my second company, Teleport Europe. So it was, I went to the chancellor of, well, he was lower Saxony's prime minister at the time, Gerhard Schröder. And he was right in Hanover. Hanover was in the center of Europe. It was the center of Germany. And I said, you know, Mr. Schröder, you should have a teleport. And you should be able to combine space and fiber optics and mobile. And he said, okay, well, you know, how do I do that? And I told him how he should do it. The next day, his finance minister called me and said, Mrs. Johnson, Minister Schroeder says that we should give you everything. And they did. And so we started it. And it's very nice because afterwards he always said, Candace Johnson, and that's why, by the way, I'm wearing my German decoration because he always said Candace Johnson brought me into telecommunications. And Teleport Europe, for the Astra was for freedom of choice for citizens, but Teleport Europe was for companies to be able to be pan-European companies, to be able to have European-wide networks, and also for Europe, for Eastern European companies and countries to leapfrog the rest of Western Europe, because we were using satellite communications, digital communications, at a time when other people were still using analog telecommunications. So this was great. Okay, next one, please. So, I talk about universal access and satellites providing universal access. So I decided that mobile satellite should also be used around the world. And indeed, I was very thankful to help create Iridium. So, people talk about OneWeb, they talk about Starlink. I kind of go yawn because, quite frankly, in 1994, I was doing Iridium. As you can see, it is very similar to OneWeb and to Starlink. And, we were doing it 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So, please. Anyway, the idea was always to provide universal access. And then, the same thing happened when I got to know about the internet. And I said, at that time, and still today in some places around the world, is very difficult to get good internet. And so I said, we should put the internet on satellite. World's first broadband satellite internet. It was so funny because I also called it Internet in the Sky, and Microsoft had decided they wanted to do an Internet in the Sky, but I had the name first, so I won. It was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So anyway, but it's always about providing, universal access. This is what makes me get up in the morning, and certainly what made me get up in the morning in those years. Next slide, please. Now, this is the really fun one. I promised you that there would be another picture with not just one woman, that there would be a picture with many women. And so in 2012, two young ladies from New Zealand called me and they said, Candace, you're doing internet, you're doing satellite. We don't have good connectivity in New Zealand, and we are going to go to Australia. Can you help us go to Australia and get some satellite connectivity? I said, don't be ridiculous. Just start your own satellite, OwnSat. And so we started Oceania Women's Network Satellite. Now, this is so beautiful. Only women are allowed to invest in it. And we have women from all of the Oceanic islands, from Vanuatu, from Cook Islands, from Samoa, from Papua New Guinea. And we also put that together with the Global Telecom Women's Network. And we created then Pacific. And Pacific, you see all of those islands in the Pacific? Well, what we did is that we put beams on all of those islands. So you can just do the next slide, please. There you go. You see all of those islands. And what is so interesting about those beams, so we have dedicated satellite beams that are beaming high throughput broadband internet to each of those islands. I want you to notice one thing. There is no bandwidth that is lost on those islands. It is concentrated on every single island, and it doesn't go over the ocean. Quite frankly, everybody talks about Elon Musk and Starlink, and that's great. But the fact of the matter is, it's a very inefficient use of bandwidth. And that is also what I'm pleading for, is that we have efficient use of all of our resources, sustainability. And these are so beautiful. Please go to the next slide and you'll see. So, here we are bringing, can you imagine? Do you know what our slogan is? Our slogan, I love it. I mean, who else could have a slogan? The heart of broadband. That is what we, OwnSat and Pacific, do. And we are bringing high throughput broadband internet to schools, to hospitals, to villages, and we have such beautiful situations there. Please, the next slide. We're also, unfortunately, all of those islands, many of them will disappear with the climate change. And so, unfortunately, we are also serving as an early defense warning for saving lives. So, now we're going to go real quickly because we're going to talk just a little bit about cyberspace. About, my God, also in about 2011, I guess, I said I learned about Raspberry Pi, and I wanted to go to Saudi Arabia. I was doing some work with Saudi Arabia. They didn't want to have their young women learn how to code and program. So I said, okay, we'll go to Lebanon. And so we went to Lebanon. But guess what happened? All of those people, the Syrian refugees in Lebanon, we schooled them with the Raspberry Pi. I had a friend, Eliane Metni, here again, fabulous woman who came and put everything into the Arabic language. And then we went into the refugee camps. Also because Raspberry Pi doesn't use energy, doesn't need it. And so we could really be very efficient and help those people. And then afterwards, people are always talking, and I think they're putting women down. So I was at a conference and somebody was saying, oh, we're doing beading and we're teaching these women how to bead and everything. I said, this is ridiculous. You should teach them how to code and to program. And so I said, I will give you 50 Raspberry Pis and I will give a program to you. And we will not have we had youth to youth for our Raspberry Pis in Lebanon. I said, we will now do mamas to mamas. And so please go to the next slide and you will see that is our Mama's Dream Hub. And the women have Raspberry Pis and they can learn how to code and program. And they're already doing programs with the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya. So, this is what I call is great. Now, of course, we have to take care of our own, of our earth. And so about also 15 years ago, I started saying we must use space to access the universe and to make certain that our planet is okay. And so we are doing with satellites, we're doing protecting our wild regions with when we have the forest fires. We're protecting our rivers and our oceans because we're monitoring them. We are doing precision agriculture. We are doing extreme weather prediction. So, here again, we're doing so much with satellites that people do not quite realize. And I'm fortunate, particularly in my job as chair of Seraphim Space, where we code of conduct for all of our portfolios. And I have to thank Mariana Bozesan for that, because she came and she spoke about sustainability to our investors. And from then on, we only do this. So, so we are investing in companies like Spire, Planet Watchers, everything to make certain that we are taking care of our wonderful Earth. And of course, we also have to take care of space, because space now is becoming a limited resource. And just like the ocean, when people threw junk into the ocean, they're now unfortunately doing the same thing with space. And so I'm also the vice chair of a company called North Star, where we are literally making certain and taking the junk out, but also putting in rules. And just like, with the cars, when we had traffic management, we are putting in rules for traffic management in space. Next slide, please. And I hope that everybody is going to now, after I've spoken and I've said how great space is, because I really do believe, I always tell everybody, pick your weapons. My weapon happens to be space, but I do think, now with the democratization of space, because of the miniaturization of components, that everybody can build their own satellite, they can build their own rocket, and countries can go into space. And this is very important now. This is something I'm fighting for, because just like Luxembourg, 1983, 400,000 people, there are countries now who want to come into space, and there is unfortunately a colonization of space. And so we must be very careful. And I'm working now with the United Nations, with the ITU, to make certain that new emerging countries in space also have access, particularly because they're the ones that need them the most for the climate change, for the precision agriculture, for the water, etc. So this is very important. Next slide, please. So just because we're talking about women, and that's cool. 30 years ago, I started the Global Telecom Women's Network, and it is such a joy to have a brain trust. And the next slide, we also then 10 years ago started the Global Board Ready Women, and just recently now, Vivian Rading, our dear friend who many of my friends know, she has now succeeded in getting the European law passed to have 40% of women on boards. But you know, these things you have to take an initiative, and you have to keep on going, and you have to believe. You have to believe that you're going to have success. It never occurred to me that we were not going to have success, whether it be with Astra, whether it be with Ideagen, whether it be with Europe Online, whether it be with OwnSat, with Pacific. We've started everything usually from scratch, which I think is the best way. So anyway, so we had tremendous success there. And then next slide. So this is a fun slide. I was very fortunate to be asked by Fortune to be interviewed. And you know, as a woman, you always want to be beautiful. And so, what do I have to do? I had to put on my, you know, my clean suit, which was not the way I had imagined myself to be in Fortune magazine. But I was able to also get 10 young women in space, and I'll just show you two of their pictures right now. So this one of them is Interstellar Lab, Barbara Belvisi. So I got these young women also to be featured in Fortune. I was very happy about that. She's building modules for sustainable life on Earth and in space. And another young woman, Helene Huby, she's doing her own spaceship, and I've invested, and she's one of my proteges, and we will be doing microgravity experiments, and we will also be going to the moon. Next slide, please. Next slide. And so I want to end this presentation today with a hope, which I'm determined is going to happen. I'm working with a German friend, and our goal, like with Gwen Shotwell from SpaceX, is to have an all-female space crew on the International Space Station. So I hope that I've been able to share with you some ideas of how you could get involved in using space to achieve the sustainable goals. They are so important, and it can really make a difference. I always say space is immediate infrastructure, and so it would be great if everyone could join in helping us achieve climate and good climate and sustainable goals. Thank you so much.